I thought I'd try a little something different. The folks over at Dragon Plus and the Dragon Plus team released a list in the most recent article that I happened to read that was their 20 house rules for 5th edition. I did a top 10 on my own personal top 10 house rules for 5e, so I thought it would be fun to go through their list and see what we think of them and see if there's something we've thought of already or something new. So if you want to see what those are, stay tuned. All right, so let's take a look. Here is the 20 house rules for 5th edition by Sam Hanshaw here on Dragon Plus Magazine. So I did read through these very, very briefly ahead of time. Some of them, obviously, most of you have heard of, but some of them are a little unique and interesting, and I like them, so I thought this would be interesting to discuss. So rule 1, roll stealth only at the moment of possible detection. So rather, and I guess the thought process behind this, the player's handbook, like it states, doesn't tell you exactly when a player needs to roll a stealth check. So they're saying rather than having them, many players, like it states here, will use the skill as if they're entering stealth mode with a roll up front. So it's more of a clarification on how to handle things, meaning, all right, I'm going to make a stealth check, and I make my stealth roll, and then I attempt to go do whatever I'm going to do. So what they're saying here is I don't ask them to roll. Instead, I wait until someone could see them or is looking for them and ask the player to make the roll at the moment of discovery. I find this adds tension and reduces the total number of rolls in a session. These rolls can be made in secret if the enemy is also hidden. So I like this. I think that that's a good concept. I feel like it makes it more like any kind of stealth-based game. I was going to say Assassin's Creed, but, or maybe, or Splinter Cell, something like that, where you're sneaking around and it's really only an issue of you getting caught, so you make the stealth check then. And it does reduce, theoretically, the overall number of rolls, and then the player, especially if you haven't been doing that, they might be a little uneasy, like, wait, I don't need to make a stealth check? Why? Because, players are paranoid. These mob rules I kind of like. So small enemies share HP as a squad and attack as one, which was an interesting concept up front. So it's saying, you have a squad of enemies. Say this one is 5 members, and the HP for the squad equals the total sum of the participants. If the player deals more than enough damage to kill a member, the extra damage stays with the squad. Sometimes it's possible for players to kill 2 or more members with a single swing. The squad acts as a single unit on the squad's initiative and only makes one attack, enhanced by the number of squad members. For instance, if I want a squad of 4 hobgoblins to attack a player, I'll give the squad 44 HP, the total of all the hobgoblins, and I'll have them make a single attack, because hobgoblins, I believe, only have 1 attack in the monster manual, giving them a +2 bonus for each member of the squad alive beyond the first, and I'll similarly give them a bonus to damage for the hit for each member participating in the attack. So again, I don't know if it's going to be similar, but +2 bonus to attack and a +2 bonus to damage for each member. It says this rule allows a group of weaker enemies to still threaten players while also cutting down on the total number of rolls needed in a fight. Another option, which is something I will cover in a future video, is the handling mobs rules that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide. This I also really like. Minion enemies only have 1 HP and don't take half damage on a failed save. This is another way to add a ton of enemies to a battle while also circumventing the need to track dozens of HP values. I like using this to represent hordes of enemies like a rat colony or an attack from goblin warrens. You might remember this rule from an earlier version of D&D. So the concept is, if your party's getting attacked by a whole bunch of rats or goblins or kobolds, they only have 1 HP. So what's cool is, in theory, this says the DM, if the party attacks them, they can roll really high damage numbers on their attack and kill the creature. But they can also roll really low damage and then also kill the creature. So they're able to systematically take them out, but they don't take half damage on a failed saving throw. So like a fireball that they succeed on, they're still alive and in the fight. This may take some time for your players to get used to if they're used to playing the rules as written. But I do like this. I think it makes minions, again, they give them more threat than just something you can easily mow through. This one's been around for a while. A lot of people have used this. I'm not sure if you use it in your game. I'm actually curious. Leave your thoughts in the comment below. But doing how you handle critical hits. So this rule is max damage plus a die roll. So normally, if you crit on something that's a d6, you roll 2d6. As I'm sure some of you, and definitely some of my players know, 2d6 sounds great in theory, but they, more often than not, will roll double ones on 2d6, so that 2d6 becomes a 2, and one person could beat that on a singular d6 roll. So this, in that same answer where you do crit on 2d6, the first die would do 6, and then the second die would add you'd add the roll. So it's max damage plus the die roll. That way, it does make it seem a little more powerful. The damage will do a little bit more. You need to think about this on both sides, because if you do have things like a rogue or paladin, it's going to be dealing a lot of single target damage on a critical. That could be a massive amount of dice. So something to think about. Streamline's critical hits while also giving them a more potent damage boost. Makes every crit hit dangerous, exciting, but be aware that it can also make fights more dangerous for players, as enemies get this too. We got a couple inspiration rules here. Team inspiration. I've run games where people are reticent to use their inspiration and even less likely to send it to somebody else. That's not the case in my games typically, but I could see why people would want to hoard it. To remedy this, I've added a bowl that I put something in to serve as a group pool of inspiration. I really like this. I limit the bowl to holding 4 pieces of inspiration at a time. I found that people are more likely to use the inspiration when doing this, knowing that it will still be there. There'll be some left over. So basically, you have a pool. If I give out inspiration, and I'm guessing they picked 4 because I'm assuming the maximum number of players is 4, because typically each player can have an inspiration. This would let you put it in like a pot that people can pull from. But this is something else I'm curious about. Maybe I give out inspiration too freely. That could be part of it. I do give out inspiration pretty frequently at my games, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, I have those inspiration cards, and they're fun to have them in play. So maybe that's why my players will use it, because they have cool things they can use it for. But if you're just treating inspiration as a reroll, maybe people are hoarding it. I've never had a problem, having people burn through their inspiration. But that's a good way to do it if people are hoarding it. Inspired saving throws. Players can spend their reaction and a point of inspiration to gain a saving throw reroll. This is weird, though, because you can technically just use an inspiration to reroll a roll, give yourself advantage on a roll. So I'm not sure why they're giving you spending your reaction to get a saving throw reroll. That one, I don't really like that one. These next 2 rules are very common in other game systems. I want to say it's Powered by the Apocalypse, but I could be wrong, as this kind of a system that I have a thing for that. Allow a player to spend a point of inspiration to remember their character purchases a mundane item. So they deduct the gold as if they bought it earlier and just lost it in their pack. Adventurers carry all sorts of things, only to remember, they sometimes lose track of them, only to remember them at just the right moment. If you want your players to have that sort of luck, consider this house rule. So, oh man, if only we had a crowbar to pry open this chest. Well, hang on. I think I have a thing for that. They spend an inspiration, they spend the gold for the crowbar, they get the item. Again, we've seen things like this in other RPG systems, but it's a cool little way to, again, this seems to be maybe people are hoarding inspiration at other people's tables, so they're giving them the opportunity to spend it more. Similarly to that is I know someone for that. Allow a player to spend inspiration to describe a contact who can help with the current situation. So again, this is the I know a guy who whatever. So same concept, using inspiration. Allow the players to swap it. Now these are where it starts to get interesting. Allow the players to swap initiative rolls with one another before the combat starts. Sometimes players have an idea that requires teamwork based on a specific order they'd like to act in, and this allows them to always get the order they want. This isn't one I personally use because I use the slightly more restrictive house rule that comes next, which is, on the first turn of combat, allow players to lower their initiative to 1 point lower than that of an ally. Sometimes a character really wants to go after someone else, and it'll help their teamwork. I'm willing to let them assign a penalty to their own initiative to make that happen. Sometimes this results in the whole group wanting to go in a specific order, and they'll drop their initiative to do it. Most often this results in their enemies going before them, all in a big block, which tends to work out poorly for the players, so they should exercise this option with caution. Each of these rules allows players to manipulate their initiative at the start of combat. If you don't like the idea of players switching up their initiative but they're clamoring to set up cool combinations they envision. Remind them of the ability to ready as an action. Ready, yeah. So we know ready action. It delays an action and uses your reaction to do so. So something that I realized in a game I just ran, and I think I personally think I'm doing it wrong, is typically when I have my players go, I have them roll their initiative, and I have my initiative trackers. Boop, 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 I put them on my DM screen. But then I'll also immediately roll for the monsters, and then also put the monsters on the screen. And I think I think that's a bad idea, personally. I think you should keep track of where the monsters go, but I don't think the players should know the order until the monsters go. And that's something that I mean, maybe that's even the way the rules are as written, but I'm just doing it for ease of tracking. But I feel like players will get upset or will formulate plans based on the fact that they know the enemies are going next. So I think that that's a good idea in my, just again, not necessarily one of these rules, but something for me to think about. Players roll their initiative. Before combat starts, they either delay them based on these rules or swap them based on the previous rule, and then they don't know where the enemies are in the initiative order. You figure that out on your own. I like that because then these are more impactful. They may lower and swap around and then find out that, yes, all the enemies go before them. Or maybe they all go after them and the enemies roll really poorly. Rule 11. This another interesting one. During character creation, allow players to apply one of their attribute bonuses to a different stat. Sometimes players box themselves into picking races based on their ability bonuses. I like to allow some flexibility and encourage my players to give me a neat backstory that fleshes out their alternate bonus. So this would be something like, I want to play a rogue, but I'll just play an elf because an elf gets a +2 dexterity, or I'll play a halfling because it gets a +2 dexterity, and that fits, and I'm building it around my class, and then my race is less of a benefit, more than like sort of almost a requirement. Like I'm doing it because it makes my stats better. So in this theory, you could pick a dwarf, and then instead of applying the dwarf's +2 bonus to Constitution, it becomes a +2 bonus to Dex, and you got to come up with a cool backstory that explains why. And I like that. I also feel like that definitely helps better when everybody's making characters at the table together, rather than people making separate characters and then coming together all at the same time, which is a goal I strive towards in my next campaign that I run. I would like to have everybody together during the creation of characters, rather than everybody doing it and then all coming together after the fact. Rule 12. Fumbles in combat leave you open so that your enemy can immediately use their reaction to make an attack against you. This is interesting. I've seen a lot of DMs use fumble tables to punish people for rolling a critical failure during combat. Personally, I feel that rolling a 1 and automatically missing is punishment enough. A lot of people agree with that, but I also understand that sometimes it's been cool to have those fumble moments. I think this house rule strikes a good balance. This also means that your fighter who's making several attacks around doesn't get punished super hard for rolling a 1, since they are often trying to tank hits for other party members. This can actually work for their advantage if their ally can escape. So the thought process is, if you roll a natural 1, or a critical fumble, as people sometimes call it, the enemy can immediately use their reaction to make an attack against you if they're within attacking range. So the thought process is, the enemy's getting an attack of opportunity essentially against you, although it's not qualified as an attack of opportunity, for you rolling a 1. And that way it mitigates any of the nonsense that can happen with critical fumble tables. But then it still requires the enemy to expend a resource in their reaction. 13. The character misses a check by 3 or less, offer them a chance to succeed, but with a penalty, or have a negative consequence associated with their success. This, yet again, is something we see in several other RPG systems. You succeed, it's like a modified success, or something along those lines. The success becomes with a penalty or some sort of consequences associated. So sometimes a failure to skill can be a setback for the players or the DM. In instances of close calls, I like to offer players a tough choice or extra consequences. Some example: athletics, you successfully swing on the chandelier but suffer a level of exhaustion. Investigation, you manage to search the desk and find the hidden compartment, but you knock a vase to the ground, alerting enemies in the next room. Deception, they'll go along with your lie, but only for a bribe or a favor in return. Rule 14, DM rolls player death saving throws behind the screen. This one is interesting. This is something I have never done, since I had an NPC ally drop to 0 hit points during a fight and rolled their death saving throws something I have done rather. I rolled their death saving throws behind the screen. I noticed that my players were far more concerned for that NPC's safety than they were when each were on the ground and bleeding. Yeah, so that's an interesting concept. So there's obviously, I could see how this could go over very well, or I could see how this could go over very poorly. The concept is you're down at 0 hit points and dying, and you need to make death saving throws. But I'm going to make the death saving throws behind the screen in private so you don't know what's happening. Because in theory, the players don't know how close to death their dying party member is. And the player, obviously, this takes trust, right? I have a tendency to roll relatively high on my d20 rolls, which is not like a flex or a brag or anything. It's just the nature of how things go. Maybe it's the dice I have. I don't know. But I roll 20s relatively often. So that would mean my players would pop back up to 1 hit point. But if you roll routinely poorly as the DM, then you may cause character deaths, and they may feel cheated or gypped because you killed their character in that sense. So I can definitely see there being contention there, like, you did this, it's your fault my character's dead, I would have rolled 3 20s or whatever, and I would have gotten back up. Obviously, I don't know. Rule 15. Characters gain a level of exhaustion at the end of combat if they failed a save during the combat. This is another house rule that goes a long way towards encouraging players to help each other out. From a role-playing perspective, it adds some additional opportunities around characters really acting like they got their bell rung after a difficult fight. I'd like to thank the WotC video content strategist Trick Jared for introducing me to this rule. So I like this. I had mentioned this before in a previous video, the idea of bad stuff happening when you fail a death saving throw. I like this. Characters gain a level of exhaustion at the end of combat, so it doesn't impact your combat currently, which is good because there's a way to make some of those you could make it really stressful. Going down to 0 kills you. Going down to 0 puts you at a level of exhaustion, and then that way, if you boomerang up and go back down, you get 3 hit points. You go back down, it's 2 levels of exhaustion. So it makes dying more severe. This is just a level of exhaustion if they fail the death saving throw during the combat. So that's it. But if there's multiple combats in that day, this could be brutal. I like that. Give characters an additional tool proficiency or language proficiency with each intelligence bonus they have. I've already mentioned this in my videos. That's what I do. Intelligence is kind of an underused stat. I'm experimenting with this one to give high intelligence characters a more worldly and cultural feeling without causing them to become imbalanced. I always use languages, but you could do tools too, or both, or have a combination. So I really like this. I think it makes intelligence more useful and not just an auto dump stat for people. Rule 17, give players an extra attack bonus for good description. This is interesting. So this rule is good if you don't play with inspiration, or if you do, whatever, do what you want. Otherwise, I recommend awarding inspiration for particularly good descriptions. My rule of thumb when employing this is that any good description gives an extra +1 to hit or a +1 to the spell save DC. If the character expends a resource or utilizes the environment or some other item, give a +2. Be careful with employing this rule too often, as it can lead to rewarding only the extroverts in your group or create longer combat encounters as players describe the arc of every swing. A reasonable thing to consider. Characters can turn a hit into a critical by suffering 2 levels of exhaustion. This is tricky. This could be interesting. I like this house rule because it's not something that's abusable. Characters aren't going to want to volunteer to suffer levels of exhaustion on whim, but it can result in great signaling events when the fight comes down to the very end and the character and the nemesis are both cut and bruised. Having a player commit to have their character deal with that will probably be the final blow to make for great cinematic moments. Thanks to Trick Jarrett once again for introducing. I like that rule. Again, I could see the abusability in theory, not necessarily, right? Because you're taking 2 levels of exhaustion is serious. That puts you in a pretty disadvantaged state right out the gate. And considering either a 5th level spell or higher is the only way to remove exhaustion, or an 8-hour rest of a long rest, that's a pretty impactful thing. But they're right. I can definitely see, and you've seen movies and things where this happens, where like someone puts in a last, what is the word? Last ditch. That's what I was thinking. Last ditch effort to just like surge of power to do what they need to do to defeat the enemy, and then that really hampers them in the long run. Rule 19, if a player describes something difficult but cool they want their character to do and it advances the story, don't roll, just have them succeed. This is often referred to as the rule of cool or something similar to that. Just do it. Like, if it's super cool and you really want it to happen, and that's something I've actually seen happen in games where, like, man, the DM's like, that's so cool, I hope it works. And then they roll and it doesn't work. And it's just like, well, if you hoped that it worked, why don't you just let it happen? So there are a few things that let the wind out of a group's sails as much as a character describing a creative solution well, only to have a critical failure. Often when these situations happen, I found myself let down as the DM too. I decided to stop letting that happen. If the scene and the moment are right, just let them succeed. If you're not comfortable with automatic success, give them advantage on the roll. That's reasonable, right? If you don't want to do the no roll necessary, you just do it, then give them advantage and hope for the best. Lastly, if the bard, I like this rule a lot too, if the bard uses vicious mockery and their insult makes me laugh out loud, the target gets no saving throw. The bard earned it. I think that that's good too. I think it's silly, but that's like the kind of D&D that I play at my table, right? Like, obviously, I don't think some of these would go at more strict tables. Obviously, really any of these, because they're all homebrew rules, would go at more strict tables. I could see these not happening. You know where I could see these happening? I could see these happening at like an Acquisitions Incorporated table, right? Because there seem to be more loosey-goosey with the rules. Fun. I think that that could definitely be something. At my table, yeah, I kind of run a game in a similar fashion. So I like these 20 rules. Now, maybe not every single 20, every single one of all 20, but there are definitely some that I do enjoy and I would like to employ in my games. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about these, and I will see you next time. There's, do the things, subscribe and bell and all the fun stuff.